colleagues and dear students, wish you all a very good evening. I, Dr. Preeti Gehlot, Associate Professor, Department of Anesthesiology at PGIMS Rohtak, heartily welcome you all to this academic webinar hosted by Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, Rohtak City Branch, Haryana. Ever since the COVID-19 pandemic began, we anesthesiologists have been in the key position of critical care providers. The clinical workload for all of us increased tremendously, and the routine academic activities, especially for our postgraduate students, took a toll. So, from the very beginning, a lot of thought and effort has gone into maintaining the academics. Indian Society of Anesthesiologists has been very actively promoting and encouraging the virtual learning platforms. At the same time, Society of Anesthesiologists Haryana has been very particular in following, implementing, and conducting such virtual conferences, CMEs, and webinars of all the private practitioners, faculty members, and our dear postgraduate students. So, to begin with our today's program, I first of all invite Dr. Yashveer Arya, Secretary, Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, for the introduction of today's program.
Respected seniors and dear colleagues, a very good evening and warm welcome to an enlightening series of webinar hosted by ISA Haryana. This is the second webinar in the series. First one being organized by ISA Faridabad branch. The second one is being hosted by our vibrant Rohtak branch. I feel proud to welcome our dignitaries from national platform to encourage the cause. Now, I welcome Dr. Savita Saini, ISA President Rohtak, to formally welcome the dignitaries and introduce the speakers. Thank you. Long IS.
Thank you, sir. With great joy, may I now invite Dr. Savita Saini, Senior Professor and Head Department of Anesthesiology, PGIMS Rohtak, and President of ISA Rohtak City Branch for the welcome address.
Hello, good evening everyone. I welcome you all to this session from the Department of Anesthesia Branch, Rohtak, which is the second in this series, and rightly said by Dr. Preeti that during this time we have been having or feeling the devoid because of the continuous space which we normally have for the academic activities which we were not able to follow, but for last few months one can say it has been resumed in webinars series. So I welcome you all to this webinar series, and I give this back over to Dr. Preeti to introduce the chairpersons for the today's session. Dr. Preeti.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now kindly call upon Dr. Sunil Sethi, President, Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Preeti, and it's a privilege to have our national president in this webinar, Dr. Muralidhar Joshi, who has taken some time to spare for this moment, although he was driving. He had personal talk with me also. I thank President-elect Dr. Venkatgiri. I thank Dr. Suresh Bhargav, Vice President, ISA National. I thank Dr. Bajwa, Dr. Rajiv Gupta, and they will be joining shortly. And I thank Dr. Savita Saini for hosting this webinar series. And Rohtak City branch is a very dynamic branch. Before I thank others, Dr. Naveen Malhotra, National Secretary, has done a wonderful job to make us see each other and continue our education program. And Dr. Preeti has been very helpful throughout these web series in providing the IT part to us. I welcome all the delegates and best of luck, Dr. Shant and Dr. Renu, for their speech. Thank you very much. Back to Preeti.
Thank you, sir. I now feel privileged and honored to invite our chief guest for today, Dr. Muralidhar Joshi, President, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, NEL, to kindly address the august audience.
Good evening, everyone. Greetings from National. Sorry, actually, I'm driving back to my own native place. And well, thanks for accepting my request, Dr. Naveen and Dr. Sethi, and respected President of Rohtak City Branch, Dr. Sethi, and of course, Haryana State Branch, of course, Vice President Dr. Suresh Bhargava, President Dr. Vikram, our National Honor Secretary, Naveen Malhotra, Honorable Treasurer, Virendra Sharma, and of course, Rajiv Gupta, our close friend, Governing Council member, and all the dignitaries who are assembled over there for the meeting. And I think that the ISA Rohtak branch is doing fabulous work under the guidance of the stalwarts like Dr. Sethi and Dr. Saini Madam and the precious we are, of course, we're the Haryana State Branch. So we are happy and proud about all the activity that's going on. We feel very happy about it. I wish to the event a great success and all the best once again. Long live ISA. Jai Hind. Thank you,
sir.
Thank you, Nadav.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words as always. May I now call upon our guest of honor, Dr. Suresh Bhargava, Vice President, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists National, to kindly say a few words.
Good evening, everybody. Honorable, all the respected seniors, Chief Guest, Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi, President ISA. Murli Joshi. Dr. Naveen Malhotra, Secretary ISA. Dr. Venkat Giri, President-elect ISA. Virendra Sharma, Treasurer ISA. Dr. Bajwa, Dr. Rajiv Gupta, GC member ISA. Dr. Arya, Dr. Savita, Dr. Sethi Sir, and all the speakers and chairpersons, and all the members of organizing committee. I feel honored to be here as a part of this academic webinar. As Dr. Preeti has told, that Haryana Society of Anesthesiologists is doing great works in the field of academics during this corona pandemic. A few months back, Yuva ISUCAN was organized by ISA Haryana, which was a memorable event, and this was liked by one and all over the India, and credit goes to ISA Haryana leadership and its mentor. And when mentor is Dr. Naveen Bhai, और आजकल तो वैसे भी आप टीवी देखो या कंप्यूटर पे देखो या व्हाट्सएप पे देखो, सिर्फ दो भाई नजर आते हैं, एक तो नरेंद्र भाई, दूसरे हमारे नवीन भाई। और दोनों ही की खासियत यह है कि देश के साथ साथ वो अपने प्रदेश को भी समृद्ध बनाने में लगे हुए हैं, जिसका उदाहरण ISA हरियाणा द्वारा लगातार इन वेबिनार्स का सफलतापूर्वक आयोजन करना है। मैं नवीन भाई को इसके लिए बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं कि वो आगे भी इस प्रकार का आयोजन करते रहें, जैसे युवा ISUCAN उन्होंने ऑर्गेनाइज किए, इस प्रकार के फंक्शन और भी आयोजित किए जाएं। I also congratulate Dr. Sethi, Dr. Arya, Dr. Savita, and all organizing committee of ISA Haryana and all the members of ISA Haryana for successful conduction of virtual conferences. Jai Hind, Jai ISA.
Thank you, sir, for such lovely words for Haryana ISA. I now feel privileged to invite our guest of honor, Dr. Venkat Giri KM, President-elect, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists National, to put forward his views.
President Dr. Sethi, President National Dr. Joshi, President ISA Rohtak Dr. Saini, National Secretary Naveen, Branch Secretaries and State Secretary Dr. Arya and others, Vice President Dr. Suresh Bhargava, Treasurer Virendra, all colleagues in the GCA and friends and faculty. I'm happy to participate in this webinar of our Secretaries Branch. Both national and national, state, city, all branches, it's his branch, it's his home branch, state branch, his home city branch is conducting. So you all must be honored to have secretary in your home branch, and you all stand as a strong support to him, all his academic activities. He is working tirelessly day in and out since this earlier also, but COVID time is more because others are relaxing. He is more working. Even when his family members were there in the hospital, he was more worried about ISA and doing this thing. So it's all must be because of your constant support wherever he is there, whenever he is there, you are supporting. So this academic program also will be good program like his all other programs. I wish all the best and hope that you will continue this support with him and be with him all the time. Thank you. Thank you for inviting. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I cordially invite Dr. Naveen Malhotra, Honorary Secretary, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists National, to give his message to all our guests.
Thank you, Dr. Preeti. Respected President ISA National, Dr. Joshi sir, Vice President Dr. Suresh Kumar Bhargava, President-elect Dr. Venkatgiri, my treasurer partner Dr. Virender Sharma, GC members Dr. Rajiv Gupta and Dr. Bajwa. Both will be joining Preeti soon. They are in hospital and they will join in between. And President of ISA Haryana and the presiding officer for today's program, Dr. Sunil Shetty, Secretary Haryana Society of Anesthesiologists, Dr. Arya, a very respected patron of ISA Haryana and President of ISA Rohtak City Branch, Dr. Savita Saini Madam, and Secretary of ISA Rohtak, Dr. Praveen Goyal. I see my other senior colleagues across the state, Dr. Vivek Saluja, President of ISA Gurgaon City Branch, Dr. Ved Topli and Dr. Nirupma, office bearers of Faridabad City Branch, and Dr. Sangeeta Khanna, Dr. Dinesh Arora, both past presidents of ISA Haryana. Very respected Dr. C.V. Singh and Dr. Ajay Batra, past president of ISA Haryana. I'm sorry if I may be other colleagues, Dr. Kirpakaram, Secretary of ISA Tamil Nadu Branch, and before I was thinking of calling Dr. Joshi, so I always used to discuss with him, और इन्होंने कहा था कि ना एक बार कृष्ण भगवान जी से हमने ज्ञान ले लिया कुरुक्षेत्र में, अब हमें और ज्ञान लेने की जरूरत नहीं है. तो सर ऐसा नहीं है. Yes, Haryana people have taken knowledge from Krishna Bhagwan in the land of Kurukshetra, but we look forward for continued education programs, and this is a start of those particular programs, and I'm very sure that they will be a very successful programs. Dr. Giri has very rightly said the support from the local branch and the, yes, Dr. Giri, I put it on record, the blind and unconditional support by the state branch and from the city branch and my department also. I have never had any leave problems before COVID when I used to travel, and I could travel because I could get leave. I'm in a government job, so leaves are important for me also. So there was a unconditional support from the department also, and yes, from the family members also. So thank you for joining the Rohtak City Branch webinar. It's really an honor to have you all on board. Thank you very much. Long live ISA. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Dr. Virender Sharma, Treasurer, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists National, also our guest of honor, say a few words.
Thank you. Good evening, respected President, Dr. Murali Joshi sir, Vice President, Dr. Suresh Bhargava, President-elect, Dr. Venkatgiri, Dr. Naveen, Secretary, Dr. Bajwa, Dr. Rajiv Gupta, GC members, President Haryana, Dr. Sunil Sethi, Secretary, Dr. Yashveer, President of Rohtak City Branch, Saini Madam, other office bearers of different city branches of Haryana. December is the month when I think that Haryana usually conducts its annual conference, and I still have the memories of last year's annual conference in Karnal, and we had a very lovely time, but this time because of COVID we are missing that physical meeting. And of course Haryana state meetings they have their personal touch, which I think those who attended would remember. And during this pandemic, yes, I agree with Dr. Bhargava what he said, that Haryana has been doing an exceptional job. Your Isakon was a big hit. जो सुरेश भाई ने बोला कि आजकल दो ही लोग छाए हुए हैं, तो मैं एग्री करता हूँ कि ISA में हर जगह इतना एक्टिव पार्टिसिपेशन है नवीन भाई का कि अगर बीमार भी पड़ जाएं तो किसी को शायद पता न चले कि ये बीमार हैं. इनके मैसेजेस और कम्युनिकेशन कंटिन्यूअसली चलता रहता है. सो बिग कांग्रेचुलेशंस टू ISA Haryana, to Rohtak City Branch, and all the office bearers, and our secretary, Dr. Naveen Bhai. Thank you. Long live ISA.
Preeti's network, there are some issues. So I placed on record the best wishes conveyed by Dr. Rajiv Gupta and Dr. S.S. Bajwa. Dr. S.S. Bajwa is the senior most GC member of the zone and the educational coordinator. So he has extended his best wishes. Both are stuck up in the hospital and they will be joining in between. But they have extended their best wishes to us. And they will be joining very soon. And now it's my really pleasure to invite the scientific chairpersons for today's webinar, Dr. C.V. Singh, past president of Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, Dr. Shashi Kiran, senior professor, Department of Anesthesiology, PGIMS, Rohtak, Dr. Sushila Takshak, Madam, Senior Professor, Department of Anesthesiology, PGIMS, Rohtak, and Dr. Ajay Batra, past President of Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana. So I request the chairpersons to please put your videos on and introduce the speakers and carry on with the scientific proceedings. Over to you, chairpersons. Thank you very much.
Can't hear the voice.
Over to the chairpersons, please.
Dr. Shashi, you are not audible.
Ma'am, you're not audible.
Now?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So let me introduce first speaker, Dr. Prashant Kumar. He is Professor of Anesthesia in PGIMS Rohtak. He is a Commonwealth Fellow in Belfast, UK, some years back. And apart from that, he also holds a MBA degree in hospital administration. And he will be speaking on anesthesia for pediatric neurosurgical patients. So Dr. Prashant.
Thank you, madam. Respected chairpersons, respected dignitaries, and dear friends. I thank the organizing team, which is also all are my colleagues, seniors, friends, to thank them for giving me this opportunity. And it's very interesting to talk about anesthetic challenges for pediatric neurosurgery. I apologize from chairpersons to just juggle up with the words to make it a little more challenging for me. And when I think of starting this topic, I accept that I am confused because I'm not sure whether I should go more with the pediatric part of anesthetic management or more of the neuroanesthetic management part. Because once we start talking about the children for neuroanesthesia, I always consider that it is more of pediatric anesthesia which comes into play than the neuroanesthesia. But yes, the identification of problem, identification of the patients, and planning of all the patients for anesthetic management of neurosurgery is very important. So to start with, we all accept and believe that children are not mini adults. So the management for children differs from the adults. We cannot just simply take them as younger ones with less weight and calculate the dosage with just less weight and everything. In present COVID era, safety is paramount. So I believe that we all are safe and taking all the precautions which are needed in these days. So pediatric considerations when we talk about the neuroanesthetic part as well is because the children are different from adults in various aspects. They have different body weights, they have different airway, they behave differently with the drugs. Fluid requirements are not only different, but also we have to do very tight fluid calculations. They are different in thermoregulations. We need to avoid hypothermia very seriously. Their cardiovascular system, renal systems, they are immature, and we should be very careful for these things. So because of their different anatomy, different physiology, and obviously their behavior to the difference in the pharmacology, we need to have different approach and preparation for our younger ones. Airway always remains of utmost importance because hypoxia is the most common cause of pediatric period cardiac arrest, perioperative cardiac. When we always found, if you look for the Google for any figure or image or type of pediatric anesthesia we want to look for, we'll find these kinds of figures. And these kinds of figures are not only found out of India, but they are very commonly can be done with our setups also. This is a child in our theater, which we kept on making him play with his mobile, which his father has given him. And even with this mobile, child was so happy that we could induce him happily without having any anxiety or crying. Now, I found two very interesting images here that regarding the positioning of the infants for the successful airway management. Like because of their large head, occiput, the children, they find that the neck becomes easily their neck becomes automatically flexed when we make them supine. So if we can put some shoulder roll, the neck can become more straight. And if we can put the nose and chin axis in a straight line, it gives in having better airway management. Maintenance of fluid, we all agree that it is very important. We need to have very tight calculation. We do not want our kids to be overloaded, and we also do not want them to be hypovolemic. I always practice and I always advise my residents in theater also that we should always have a calculation of allowable blood loss before we start the anesthesia and surgery, so that we know how much blood the particular child can lose in a surgery. And to do that, if we know the weight of the child, expected blood volume, and the total hemoglobin, what we can allow to go down, hematocrit, that gives us the calculation about our allowable blood loss. It's important to know about estimated blood volume of the kids to calculate the allowable blood loss, which is higher in the premature neonates, and as they become more and more adult, it goes down. Coming to some physiological aspects of the kids which come for neuroanesthetic management, the infant skull is not fully ossified and is more compliant. So because of this viscoelasticity, they really expand, and we can find skulls which are growing like this. If they present in early stage, of course, they do not exhibit the traditional signs of raised intracranial hypertension, such as bradycardia or elevated systemic blood pressure and papilledema. But it is very important to know these features, because if these features are present, then it signals severe progression with very poor outcomes. Another part is that they have increased head circumference, bulging fontanelle, widened cranial sutures, or sundowning of the eyes, which is very typical of presentation of increased intracranial pressure in small children. Another important thing which we should remember is cerebral autoregulation, which is very tight in small children, like 20 to 60 millimeter of mercury only, and there is a very narrow margin of safety. So what happens if mean arterial pressure goes down below this, then there is always a risk of ischemia, while a hypertension in infants may present risk of intracranial hemorrhage. Preoperative considerations for neurosurgical preparation always comes with the assessment of coexisting disease, medications if child is receiving any anesthetic history, and intravascular volume and status. We need to be aware of contracted blood volume if the child is presenting with poor intake or recurrent vomiting. And airway has to be taken care of with the consideration that there can be associated craniofacial abnormalities in these child. And if the child is also presenting with some congenital cardiac disease, we need to look for anatomy and physiology of the congenital disease as well. Renal function should also be evaluated. especially if child requires any radiological evaluation in terms of dyes, IV dyes being given. So they always affect renal function. If a patient has presented with epilepsy, anticonvulsant therapy has to be looked for because it can affect our anesthetic management or drug metabolism. Preoperative sedation always remains controversial, but we always find that if child has too much of anxiety, intense crying will always cause elevation of ICP. So in those cases, it is good to consider sedation before taking up a patient for surgery. Simple fasting and pre-medication rules should be taken care of. And midazolam is a good choice if we want to consider as oral pre-anesthetic sedation for the patients. While considering the preparedness for the theater, it is always important to have a warm table warmer, bear hugger, any warm air blower. Anesthesia workstation should have a pediatric circuit with the capability of ventilating small kids, and monitors should be available for the kids as well as temperature monitoring. All airway access equipment, suction, IV access, and drugs, we need to be in proper dilution, which is required. It is always good to prepare the table beforehand before we shift the child inside. So there has to be a headrest, a table, blanket roll, under by a bear hugger, or if we have a bear hugger, to wrap around the child. It's always practical to change the profile of the monitor for pediatric or neonate as appropriate to the child being taken in theater, because the alarm settings and values of the monitors, they change with the profile itself. And battery of equipments are required for preparation of any neuro anesthetic preparation for any kid, considering from the small different sizes mask, laryngoscope, tubes with a stylet, supraglottic airways in case we need it, gel, and so on. We all are familiar with Jackson-Rees modifications of IRS TPs, which has minimal dead space, minimal resistance, and very lightweight circuit, which is good for induction and for younger children. Now coming for intraoperative management, so patient neurological status and coexisting medical issues has to be considered before choosing any anesthesia. Because in case of infants and children who come without IV access, obviously we have to go with the inhalational induction with face mask. But as we remember that all volatile anesthetics can cause an increase in cerebral blood flow, it is very important that the ventilation is controlled by the anesthesiologist to possible increase in the CO2, which can be hyperventilated and ICP can be maintained. IV access placed as needed once the child is asleep. And if the child is coming with an indwelling IV cannula because of any medication being received there, the IV induction is equally good. It is also very imperative to just remember about what we need to do for the positioning these child when they come for the neurosurgery. Generally, these patients undergo surgery in supine position with the head of the bed elevated. But even in that position, which might be looking very convenient and simpler for as we use in general anesthetics for other kids, the problem with neurosurgical patients is because of this bed elevated position, there might be neck flexion, which can result in downward migration of endotracheal tube 1 or occlusion of jugular venous drainage, which can further cause in cerebral hypertension and increase intracranial volume and pressure. So we have to be very sure about a 2-finger space should be left between the words. Then another position which is common for neurosurgical patients is a prone position, which risks for the eye injury from direct ocular pressure and hypoperfusion. The Parkman position, or a modified lateral position, is used for the lateral or midline incisions. And even for this position, appropriate padding and stabilization is very important to prevent any stretch or ischemia pressure in the axilla and the nerves. Then less commonly used position for, especially for kids, the sitting position, which requires careful attention to padding pressure points as well as securing the circuit and patient safety and stability. The venous air embolism has a major risk in patients in sitting position, and we have to be very careful while monitoring these patients to avoid any venous air embolism, one, and secondly, to detect early in case there is any venous air embolism. For maintenance of anesthesia, we always prefer a balanced anesthetic technique of opioids, volatile anesthetic, and neuromuscular blockers. And inhalational anesthetic may blunt cerebral autoregulation in a dose-dependent manner. But practically speaking, when we use inhalational anesthetics in concentration of less than 1 mg, they rarely affect our intracranial hypertension. Second effect with the inhalational agents is that if we are having neurological monitoring in terms of physiological monitoring. So there, if we use less than 0.5 mAc up to 0.5 mAc, it does not affect the sensory evoked potentials for the monitoring. So it is still safe to be used. Fluid management in neurosurgical cases is important, and it requires a good communication between the surgical team, anesthesiologist, and I consider the ward nurses as well. We need to know about since when the child is NPO and what is the guideline they have followed. If there is any delay, then what happens to the child? Has he been given some clear fluid or not? And isovolemia is goal of intraoperative fluid management to avoid hypoperfusion of the brain. And normal saline remains the fluid of choice, simply because it's slightly hyperosmolar by 308 milliosmol and is thought to attenuate formation of brain edema. We can also consider balanced salt solution for the maintenance fluid, but either is good. In patients with preoperative intracranial hypertension, we need to consider about hyperosmolar drug therapy in form of mannitol or hypertonic saline 3%. And if patients are too much of high intracranial pressures, then loop diuretics, furosemide can be considered too. Post-operatively, generally, it depends on what is the surgical outcome of the patients, and intracranial procedures and major neurosurgical cases may require post-operative care in pediatric intensive care unit. Now, coming to specific conditions which we encounter. One is pediatric brain injury, and not talking much about brain injury because Dr. Renu is going to take everything about the brain injury in coming few minutes. But still, it is not very uncommon to find children who respond with come with the pediatric brain injury. And these children, what happens that because of their laxity in the ligaments, even the trivial trauma can cause major injury to them. Another important surgery, neurosurgical surgery the children come for is anti-epilepsy surgeries. So in cases of intractable seizures, patients can present for surgical resection of seizure foci or a large area. Anesthetic concerns include possibility of perioperative seizures, altered drug metabolism because these children are already on anti-epileptics, which alter the liver metabolism and drug metabolism. And if the child is large enough and considerate enough, we can also consider awake craniotomy, who can respond to commands and understand what we are going to do. These particular surgeries, they involve SSEP monitorings like neurophysiological monitoring, which is very important because it is required to identify if any other area is getting involved. For vascular malformations like arteriovenous malformations, they are often present in childhood as acute intracranial hemorrhage, and they become very deadly for kids as well. In infants, vein of Galen or other large anomalies can also present with congestive heart failure because of high flow through the malformation. It literally creates a shunt. Open craniotomy procedures are reducing nowadays because the stereotactic surgery or microembolization under fluoroscopy is gradually picking up. The procedures may be long in duration, so these patients may require prolonged neurological monitoring and careful management of anesthesia, as well as risk of intracranial bleeding and hypertension should be considered for these patients. Coming to a very common situation which we all handle very often is hydrocephalus. The word is derived from hydro meaning water and cephalus meaning head. And this is nothing but excessive accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid resulting in abnormal widening of spaces in the brain. The etiology may be congenital as an Arnold-Chiari malformation, or maybe as acquired coming as the brain tumors or conjunctive features. So there can be obstruction in normal CSF flow, and most children will have some degree of intracranial hypertension. There can be intraventricular hemorrhage, brain tumor, congenital obstruction, and generally these patients present with headache and irritability. But it can progress to lethargy, seizures, vomiting, and ophthalmoplegias. Surgical treatment generally involves simple insertion of a drainage system, that's the VP shunt or VA shunt. And another thing can consider, like these patients can present for large head with multiple surgeries already done. Like this patient, I remember, what had already shunt on the right side, then that shunt got blocked, then there was a shunt on the left side, and even that shunt was blocked, and then the patient was presented third time for endoscopic third ventriculostomy. So prepare well. It is very important to have a good position, like children with large head. We should have a body support with a pillow under the body so that the head can support it and we can access it. Now, these patients can also come for endoscopic surgeries where under anesthesia, endoscope is placed, and through endoscope, the shunts are repositioned, positioned, or ventriculostomy is done to have the CSF flow going on. I remember this patient, it was very interesting that it was a shunt which got coiled inside and it had to be taken out under endoscopic surgery. The very important parameters which we need to look for endoscopic surgeries when we are giving anesthesia to these patients is volume, because a large volume of fluid can go into the CSF, and that not only can increase CSF if it is not watchfully done, but it can also produce other effects to the brain. Now, coming to spinal cord surgeries, the patients can come, and two most common neurosurgical procedures on spinal cord children come is spastic related surgery to the cerebral palsy or correction of a tethered cord. Or we can also get patients who come with the meningomyelocele. The tethered cord syndrome, which also comes in patients who have already gone surgery for meningomyelocele in their early ages, because what happens that chorda equina migrates rostally with the normal growth from position L4 to L1. And if any nerves are entrapped, they become stressed and they create neurological deficits. Some detail about the hydrocephalus, because it's a very common thing, not only in institutes, but also in practice also. So it can be communicating or non-communicating, and most common treatment remains surgical insertion of ventriculoperitoneal shunt. Usually a catheter is inserted via the hole in frontal horn on the ventricle. And preoperative considerations, we also always look for coexisting diseases, medicines, medical management patient is receiving, volume status, anesthetic history, and physical examination. Now, coming back to what we talked about, anxiety, midazolam, I still believe that midazolam is very safe, can be given orally, and there are studies that in doses up to 0.7 mg per kg, it has not caused any respiratory depression, although you do not rarely need this much of the dose. 0.4 to 0.5 mg per kg is good enough a dose for a young child to get to sleep. So during induction, laryngospasm and bronchospasm can increase CO2 and result in elevated ICP. So maintenance can be done with nitrous oxide if we are still using nitrous oxide, not using air. Nitrous oxide provides very good, excellent analgesia, and mechanical hyperventilation with inhalational is a very good alternative. Now, meningomyelocele is around 1 in 1,000 live births, and it's most common congenital primary neural defect. So it is derived from the two words meningo, which is involving meninges like dura and arachnoid, and myelocele, which is involvement of the neural components. So neural placard, nerve tissue, nerve roots, CSF, everything comes in this. So generally, if we have a leaking meningomyelocele, we should be operated within 24 hours to reduce neurosurgical deficit and close the defect and place a shunt or delay placing a shunt once hydrocephalus sets in. That's a surgical choice. So the patient can present for early surgery, or it can present in stage surgery also. In past few years, there was an increasing trend about putting an intrauterine procedure doing for this surgery, but now it is less favored and can be done within 24 hours of the birth. And posterior fossa decompression is the last resort to be done if the patient develops obstruction. So in case we have an exposed neural placard, there is risk of trauma while the patient is lying supine, or there is a small injury, and it can lead to excessive CSF liquid. We need to have adequate IV access and replace all the fluid deficits, including loss from the defect with normal saline, and hypothermia should be avoided. In supine position, while we are inducing the patient, the defect, it should rest in a donut or and towel under the head to minimize trauma. Or we can also consider semi-lateral or lateral position for induction. IV or inhalational induction, choice is yours. If the patient comes with an IV access, go for the IV induction, or otherwise inhalational induction. But it is always important to have a cushion or jelly ring to avoid pressure on the lesion. Endotracheal intubation with the armored tube is preferred because the patient is going to lie in prone position. Maintenance with volatile anesthetic agents, oxygen and nitrous oxide, that's what we do. And patient is position prone, obviously. Always remember to put soft material rolls or jelly bolsters under the shoulders and pelvis to allow free abdominal movement. Extremities should be padded, as we had discussed, for the prone position. Consider opioid analgesia in form of morphine, fentanyl, because we are still waiting for remifentanil and sufentanil in India. If patient is stable, can be extubated, and very simply, post-operative period, look for the stridor, apnea, bradycardia, cyanosis, respiratory arrest, secondary to brainstem herniation if we were doing an occipital vein. So we have so many choices. We have management protocols for kids. So kindly choose according to your patient and the need. And I wish you all happy and safe anesthesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prashant, for making this difficult topic very easy. And may I now invite Dr. Sushila Takshak to introduce the next speaker. We will have question answer sessions at the end.
Hello, good evening, everybody. First, I would like to thank Madam Saini, Dr. Sethi and his team for giving me this opportunity for joining this ISA webinar on neuroanesthesia. I would now like to welcome Dr. Renu Bala. Renu is a professor here with us in the department. She's a postgraduate from the same department. And we are lucky to have her as a super specialist anesthesiologist. She's done her DM from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. And Renu would like to share with us her views on the intensive care management of head injury patients. Dr. Renu Bala, please.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind words. I extend my warm good evening to all the respected dignitaries, faculty members, and all the viewers. I take immense pleasure to speak on this ever-evolving topic of ICU management of head injury. I will be briefing about this topic. Yes, I repeat, briefing, Reason being, the topic is so vast that even a section of this topic can become a topic for the talk. Traumatic brain injury, not only in India, worldwide, it is the leading cause of morbidity, mortality, disability, socioeconomic losses, and poor quality life. Next, these figures which I am giving you are from India only. A study was conducted and published by NIMHANS, Bangalore. It was few years back, maybe certain data must have been changed. Each year, around 1 million of our population are injured, 2 lakh die, and 1 million require rehabilitation. And in male, the injury is more common, around two times more common than in females. 60% of all these injuries are caused by road traffic accidents, and mostly young populations are affected. Alcohol involvement is seen in 15 to 20% of traumatic brain injury. Here I remember a person, Harman Sandhu, who filed a PIL in the court, and because of him, Supreme Court passed a judgment to ban liquor on the highways. Maybe that is preventing few percentage of our traumatic brain injury. We are saving few lives. 38 to 43% is the mortality rate in severe traumatic brain injury. There are various ways to classify it. It could be in focal or diffuse. In focal, there are contusions, hematoma, which could be SDH, subdural hematoma, or extradural hematoma. There could be penetrating injuries. Then in case of diffuse, there are concussions, diffuse axonal injuries. The primary injury and secondary injuries. Primary injuries are those which occurs at the time of impact, and secondary injuries which occur in the later part of the time, that is after injuries because of release of various kinds of mediators, vasospasm or increased ICP, cerebral edema. There are various factors which lead to secondary injury. So our target is to prevent the secondary injury. We cannot prevent the primary injury. Close versus open injury. Then mild, moderate, and severe. This classification is based on the basis of on the presence of GCS and the duration for which unconsciousness occurred. Around 15 to 30% of the patients suffering from traumatic brain injuries are admitted to the critical care ICU. The goals for which are to stabilize the patient, to prevent the intracranial hypertension, to maintain adequate and stable cerebral perfusion pressure, and avoid systemic and secondary brain insults, and then optimization of cerebral hemodynamics and oxygenation. The monitoring which is to be carried out in ICU, heart rate, ECG, blood pressure, saturation, end-tidal carbon dioxide, temperature, CVP. These are the common monitoring which I think all the centers are performing. But then ICP monitor, jugular venous oximeter, near infrared spectroscopy, brain tissue oxygenation, cerebral macrodialysis, and continuous EEG. These are the monitors which are specific for these patients, and they are available at few centers only. And neurocritical care setups usually have these monitors and these monitoring equipments. First and foremost is about mechanical ventilation of these patients, which is usually required to prevent airway from aspiration, to prevent hypoxia and hypercarbia, to prevent secondary brain injury, decrease the stress response, and modulate cerebral hemodynamics. The modes are various, which are available in our usual ventilators. It could be assist control, pressure control, SIMV, ASV, airway pressure release ventilation, pressure regulated volume control, or volume assured pressure support ventilation. The basic fundamentals of choice of these monitors is the same as that of non-critically ill, neurocritically ill patients, but the specific things which we should be watching: oxygen, carbon dioxide, and PEEP. These are the three things where I will be laying the stress. Hyperventilation, which is a very controversial topic in neuro setup, whether to do or not to do, and if it is required, then to what extent we should go. Prolonged prophylactic hyperventilation with PaCO2 of 25 mmHg or less is not recommended. This is latest BTF guidelines, which came in 2016, and there is level 2B evidence for it. And it can be done as a temporary measure to reduce ICP. Usually it needs to be avoided in the first 24 hours where there are so much of vasospasm, and decrease in CO2 will lead to decrease of cerebral blood flow and can aggravate cerebral ischemia. Brain tissue oxygen saturation or saturation for venous oximetry should be done to monitor the oxygen delivery to the brain. Then what is the goal that we need to keep? It should be around 30 to 35. That is PaCO2, not EtCO2. Next, about oxygen. Oxygen should be maintained above 60, PaO2 should be above 60 millimeter of mercury. Ideally, oxygen saturation should be above 95%. This is required so that the penumbra, the area which is very important for the survival of these patients, which is surrounding the necrotic areas, should be getting the blood supply and should be oxygenating properly. High PO2 may cause cerebral vasoconstriction and hyperoxic lung injuries. PEEP application is another controversial topic in which there is theoretical concerns that application of PEEP will increase the intrathoracic pressure and which will be transmitted to the brain through central veins of neck, and ICP will rise. But actually, it has been found that the patients who actually need PEEP are those who have poor lung compliance, such as those who have ARDS. In those patients, application of PEEP does not lead to increased ICP. So 5 to 10 centimeter of water, this PEEP can be safely applied in these patients. Jugular venous oxygen saturation less than 50% may be a threshold to avoid in order to reduce mortality and improve outcomes. This carries level 3 evidence. Then the respiratory complications, which are quite common in these traumatic brain injury patients, are ARDS, neurogenic pulmonary edema. Intracranial pressure monitoring is another important aspect of neuromonitoring of these head injury patients. Now the questions are many: whom to monitor, why to monitor, how to monitor. Let's see what BTF guidelines says about it. Management of severe traumatic brain injury patients using information from ICP monitoring is recommended to reduce in-hospital and 2-week post-injury mortality. They say in case of severe traumatic brain injury, but for moderate traumatic brain injury, they say that it depends upon from person to person or from institution to institution. If the intensivist feels the need of monitoring the ICP and think that it can improve the outcome, they should go ahead with ICP monitoring, even in moderate TBI patients. Management of severe TBI patients using guidelines-based recommendation for cerebral perfusion pressure monitoring is recommended to decrease 2-week mortality. Treatment of ICP above 22 millimeter of mercury is recommended. In last BTF guidelines, it was 20, that if increases beyond 20, we should treat the ICP. But now they are saying 22 because values above this level are associated with increased mortality. A combination of ICP values and clinical and brain CT findings may be used to make the management decisions. Continuous monitoring of ICP has been since 1980 because it reflects predisposition to cerebral injury and herniation. These patients, neurological assessment in these patients is not possible. So ICP will give us quick view about what is going inside the brain, how much damage is there, and at what time we can do the intervention, because timely intervention can make a lot of change in the outcome of these patients. Then monitoring can be direct. Direct is that is invasive monitor. Extraventricular drain, that is considered as the gold standard. The benefits of this is that even if required, CSF can be drained and to reduce the ICP. Other methods are subdural intraparenchymal probes. The complications with invasive procedures were like ventriculitis, infections. So next, indirect people are now preferring indirect or non-invasive methods of ICP monitoring. There are many non-invasive methods to monitor the ICP in these patients, particularly the patients who have bleeding or coagulation abnormalities in whom invasive is contraindicated. The various methods are transcranial Doppler, optic nerve sheath diameter, tympanic membrane displacement, MRI, then central venous ophthalmodynamics. The routine treatment for raised ICP is head elevation, sedation, treatment of hypertension, neuromuscular blockade, osmotherapy, CSF drainage, and hyperventilation. But what is the stepwise management of ICP? What things should be done at the beginning and which should be the last? Secure airway, ensure adequate ventilation, sedation, and analgesia, neuromuscular blocker if required, if the patient is having tachypnea, is hyperventilating and landing into respiratory alkalosis. To decrease the stress response, we can, then patient can be paralyzed and put on invasive ventilator. Controlled mode. PaCO2 should be checked. It should be between 30, it should not be more than 40. Small amount of CSF could be drained by EVD. Then brief period of hyperventilation should not be below 25 millimeter of mercury. PaCO2 25 to 30. We can for that we can do brief hyperventilation. Then osmotherapy. For osmotherapy, we are using either mannitol or hypertonic saline. Mannitol in the dose of 0.25 to 1 gram per kg. Then decompressive craniectomy. Surgeon, we can ask the surgeons to perform the decompressive craniectomy because when patient is not responding to any of these interventions. And barbiturates and propofol coma. Moderate hypothermia in which temperature to be kept at 33 to 34 degrees Celsius. For osmotherapy, routinely mannitol is being used. It is effective for the control of elevated ICP while avoiding hypotension. It increases cerebral blood flow by plasma expansion, decreasing blood viscosity and promoting osmotic diuresis. But if the patient is having renal failure, mannitol is contraindicated. Another problem that we face with mannitol is in cases of hypotension, because these patients several times comes with hypotension, but and therefore we cannot administer mannitol in these patients. The next choice that we have is hypertonic saline. It promotes flux of water across blood-brain barrier and improve blood flow by expanding plasma volume. Now, which one is better? Mannitol is better or hypertonic saline is better? Till now, no clear-cut guidelines are there which one to use because both are, there are several studies being performed in the last few years. Hemodynamics. CNS injury causes dysregulation of blood pressure, cardiac output, vasomotor tone, and heart rate. There is a biphasic response in these patients. Initially, there is tachycardia and increased vascular resistance, and then there is followed by vagally mediated bradycardia, decreased vascular resistance, and hypotension. And we should never forget the Cushing triad in them. ECG changes are quite common in head injury patients. 90% of in one particular study, the authors found 90% incidence of prolonged QT interval and 53% incidence of non-specific STT changes. Hypertension is found if there is injury to hypothalamus or medulla. BTF guidelines suggest the IC suggests, because there is only level 3 evidence for it, maintaining systolic blood pressure at more than or equal to 100 mmHg for patients with 50 to 69 years old, or at 110 mmHg or above for patients 15 to 49 or over 70 years may be considered to decrease mortality and improve outcomes. The treatment of hemodynamics is to treat the cause. Usually, it is the central cause which is leading to these hemodynamic changes, whether it is hypertension, hypotension, ECG changes, arrhythmias. So the best thing is to treat the cause, decrease the raised ICP. And next is about supportive therapy, sympathetic blockade, if there is tachycardia, for which we are using labetalol, and for short acting we can use other drugs also, vasopressors and inotropes for maintaining blood pressure. The recommended target cerebral perfusion pressure value for survival and favorable outcome is between 60 to 70 millimeter of mercury, depending upon patient's autoregulatory status. Avoiding aggressive attempts to maintain CPP above 70 millimeter of mercury with fluids and pressures may be considered because of ARDS. So we should not target the CPP above 70 millimeter of mercury, because we will be doing more harm to the patient instead of doing benefit. For fluid therapy, the aim is to restore intravascular volume and stabilize hemodynamics. Fluid restriction is no longer recommended. Once upon a time, it was thought to dry the brain by doing fluid restriction, but now it is no longer recommended, and CVP guided fluid should be given, which should be between 8 to 10 centimeter of water. Routinely, crystalloids are given. They are easily available, inexpensive, and several other benefits with that. And isotonic fluid should be given, which is normal saline. But now we have isolite balanced crystalloids such as Plasma-Lite and Clabi-Lite. In a recent study in neurosurgical patients, it was found that balanced crystallite solutions lead to better control of acidosis. pH remains in normal range, and renal functions are better preserved in these patients who received Plasma-Lite or Clabi-Lite instead of normal saline. But the study in traumatic brain injury is still awaited. There are certain problems with these crystalloids, such as these are poor volume expanders. They may cause cerebral edema because blood-brain barrier is already disrupted. We can consider colloids in these patients, but the condition is that patients should have intact renal functions. Out of crystalloids and colloids, no effect on mortality has been observed. There are studies where people have compared these two kinds of fluid, crystalloids and colloids, and on outcome, no change was seen. Temperature regulation. Hyperthermia causes increased edema and inflammation, while cooling may be neuroprotective. This is what we think. This is theoretical knowledge which we are reading. But Eurotherm trial 3235, which was terminated prematurely because of harm in the treatment arm. The patients who were cooled, they were experiencing more of infections. So this trial was terminated before its scheduled date. Due to compromised circulation and hypoxia in the penumbra zone, cerebral injury is more commonly seen in these patients. More pulmonary complications, infections due to absence of fever to fight infections. What BTF guidelines speak about temperature control, they say early less than 2.5 hours, short term 48 hours prophylactic hypothermia is not recommended to improve the outcomes. Sugar is equally important in these patients. Hypo and hyperglycemia both may aggravate neurological injury. Glucose is converted to lactate, and which exacerbate secondary neuronal injury. And it has been found that insulin apart from maintaining blood sugar, have neuroprotective effect. There was a study in which critically ill patients who received insulin had less incidence of critical polyneuropathy. Hypoglycemia is equally detrimental because it causes brain energy crisis when brain glucose levels are less than 0.7 millimole per liter, or LP ratio is less than 40. LP is lactate pyruvate ratio. What is the range that we should be targeting? Though BTF guidelines do not touch this issue, they leave it to the institution itself. It is, but mostly the people are following to keep the blood sugar level between 100 and to 150 milligram of. Hematological abnormalities can also occur in these patients. Anemia can be because of cerebral or extracerebral hemorrhage. These are the patients who are victim of multiple injuries. So if there is limb fracture or abdominal trauma, there is splenic injury, liver tear, because of blood loss, the patients will have anemia. Why anemia is so important in them? Because 90% of oxygen is carried by hemoglobin, and oxygen carrying capacity of anemic patient decreases. Heart and brain are most affected since these are the two organs which have maximum utilization of oxygen. Their oxygen requiring capacity is maximum in the body. The treatment is transfusion of PAC cells, then supportive treatment such as intravenous fluids, vasopressor therapy, supplemental oxygen, ventilatory support, and sedation. The last two are to decrease the oxygen requirement. TRIC trial, for the famous trial which says that transfusion less than 7 gram per DL is as effective as less than 10 gram. So transfusion trigger is although not defined, but institutional variations are there. For some centers, they are taking 8 as transfusion trigger, others are taking 9, because there are various transfusion related problems which we definitely want to avoid. The rationale for giving sedation and analgesia in them is to reduce stress and adrenocortical response and to reduce cerebral metabolic rate and oxygen consumption. Moreover, pain after neurosurgical procedures is moderate to severe, and inadequate analgesia can lead to agitation, hypertension, and vomiting. And further, it can lead to intracranial bleed or neurological complication. Routinely in our setup and most of the setup, they are using fentanyl and midazolam combination for sedation. Dexmedetomidine and propofol are also good options. For propofol, we need to use another analgesic, and hypotension, incidence of hypotensions are quite common with propofol. Dexmedetomidine is a very wonderful drug for these patients, provided we take care of bradycardia and hypotension. It has sedative effect, and it causes conscious sedation. Neurological assessment of patients is also possible when the patients are receiving it. Then it has analgesic role also. So there are several studies in which they say that dexmedetomidine is preferable over propofol, and it has neuroprotective effect also. Administration of barbiturate to induce buzz suppression as prophylaxis against intracranial hypertension is not recommended. High dose barbiturates are recommended to control ICP refractory to maximum standard surgical and medical treatment while ensuring hemodynamic stability, because the hypoxia and hypotension, these are the two killers in these patients. We need to avoid them. Although propofol may be used for ICP control, it is not recommended for improvements in mortality or 6 months outcomes. Anticonvulsants, use of anticonvulsants. That is also whether to give anticonvulsants or not to give, and if we want to give, then which anticonvulsant should be given. It has been found that clinical seizures occur in 12% of patients with head injury, while subclinical seizures, which are diagnosed by EEG, they are found in 20 to 25% of patients with head injury. They are again divided into early and late, depending upon the time of first occurrence, whether it is within 7 days of injury or after 7 days. Rationale for preventing these seizures is to limiting rearrangements in acute physiology, preventing the development of chronic epilepsy, preventing herniation and death. Two drugs which are usually used for this purpose, phenytoin or levetiracetam, both may be used, and there is insufficient evidence to recommend levetiracetam over phenytoin regarding efficacy in preventing early post-traumatic seizures and toxicity. Prophylactic use of phenytoin and valproate is not recommended for preventing late PTS. Phenytoin is recommended to decrease the incidence of early PTS within 7 days of injury. That is, prophylactic, really, we are not going to use anticonvulsant, but if the patient has any early onset seizures, then phenytoin is recommended when the overall benefit is thought to outweigh complications associated with such treatment. However, early PTS have not been associated with worse outcome. They say that even early seizures are quite common, but they are not associated with worse outcome. That means the outcomes is not affected in patients who have seizures or patients who don't have seizures. Another thing which we should take care of these patients is about infectious complications. These are very prone for infections. Sepsis is the most common cause of late mortality in these patients. Risk factors are prolonged ventilator support, massive transfusion, nutritional insufficiency. The most common nosocomial infection are UTI, followed by pneumonia. Respiratory infections could be early or late onset. The early infections are antibiotic sensitive, while those which are occurring late, they are not so usually acquired by the hospital and they are antibiotic resistant. Incidence of meningitis is 13%, and the risk factors are pleural tears with CSF leak, CSF rhinorrhea, otorrhea, or ICP monitor kept in situ for more than 72 hours. Infection of ICP devices around 1 to 27%. For the last few years, there were a lot of studies going on, antibiotic impregnated catheters used for ICP monitoring. Whether use of such catheters can lead to decreased infection or there is no difference in the infection rate. Based on those studies, BTF guidelines in the fresh one has clearly stated that use of antibiotic impregnated catheters to reduce infection is suggested, though the evidence is not very strong for it. Systemic temperature more than 38.5 degrees should be treated. Use of antibiotic prophylaxis is not indicated, rather it may predispose to severe infection. But antibiotic therapy for penetrating injury should be given, and it should be given for at least 7 to 14 days. Next, another place of infection is from tracheostomy. So what is it? Early tracheostomy is recommended to reduce ventilation days when overall benefit is felt to outweigh the complications associated with such a procedure. However, there is no evidence that early tracheostomy reduces mortality or nosocomial infection. So there is no difference in the outcome in case of early tracheostomy. Use of povidone iodine oral care, which I've seen at several centers, which they are using iodine for oral care. That is not recommended to reduce VAP, and it rather may cause increased risk of ARDS. Nutrition is crucial in head injury patients because they are patients who have hyper-metabolism, hypercatabolism, hyperglycemia, and nitrogen wasting. The risk for malnutrition, immunocompromise, and poor wound healing. Feeding patients to attain basic caloric requirement at least 5th day, and at the most by 7th day if the patient is not stabilized. In that case, we can extend it up to 7th day. That is recommended to decrease the mortality. Enteral route is preferred over the parenteral route because there are less risks of hyperglycemia and septic complications. Transgastric jejunal feeding is recommended to reduce the incidence of VAP. This I have come across in several studies where in traumatic brain injury, instead of doing Ryle's tube feed, they used to perform PEG, and through that feeding used to be done because there is the concern through Ryle's tube, the patient might have aspiration and chances of VAP, etc. could be increased. Metoclopramide is indicated to improve gastric motility because in these patients, raised ICP causes gastric hypomotility and there are more incidents of aspiration. Nursing staff, we come across in these in our ICU that the patient is not accepting oral feeds. The reason could be because the patients, because there is increase in the decrease in the gastric motility because of the raised ICP. Metoclopramide can be given, which can aid in to overcome this problem. Then parenteral route. If the patient is not at all accepting oral feeds, then we can go for parenteral nutrition instead of waiting and starving the patient. Central vein versus peripheral vein. Central vein allows higher concentration, that of 70% dextrose, while peripheral vein allows for lower concentration of the feed, that is around 30% of dextrose. Benefits of TPN are lesser degree of negative nitrogen balance, but the complications are a lot, such as fluid overload, cerebral edema, hyperglycemia, electrolyte imbalance, catheter-related complications. Caloric requirement is around 25 to 50 kilocalorie per kg per day. And resting energy expenditure is calculated and multiplied by stress factor 1.4 if no steroid used. And if steroid is used, then 1 point multiplied by 1.4 to 2. The requirement of protein is very high, so it is suggested to administer around 2 grams per kg per day of proteins to prevent negative nitrogen balance. Disseminated intravascular coagulation incidence is quite high because brain is rich in thromboplastin, which is a main activator of DIC. Low-grade DIC is seen around 8.4% of patients. Extrinsic pathway is activated by tissue injury, intrinsic pathway by endothelial injury. RBC and platelet injury causes release of procoagulant phospholipid. Diagnosis is as usual by seeing low platelet count, elevated FDPs, increased prothrombin time, decreased fibrinogen, and nowadays TEG and ROTEM are very good to diagnose DIC, and we can tell which factor is decreased. Treatment of DIC is transfusion of FFP, recombinant factor 7A, platelets, and the goal should be fibrinogen level of more than 100 and platelet count more than 50,000 and APTT time of to be normal. DVT occurs because of because there is increased coagulation. Hypercoagulated state is resulting from primary because of brain injury, prolonged periods of immobilization, and focal motor deficits. Without any prophylaxis, the incidence is as high as 54%. But when any non-pharmacological methods, that is mechanical method, use of compression devices, the incidence was found to half of this, around 25%. So how can we provide prophylaxis for DVT? They could be mechanical. And most of the centers prefer mechanical method. What does now BTF guidelines have to say about it? Low molecular weight heparin or low dose unfractionated heparin may be used in combination with mechanical prophylaxis. However, there is increased risk for expansion of intracranial hemorrhage. So the message is, if your surgeons are permitted, we can use heparin after 72 hours of injury. Decompressive craniectomy, two famous trials, DECRA trial, Rescue ICP trial. What conclusion they have drawn that it is life-saving surgery, but at the expense of high chances of severe disability among survivors. That was incorporated in the 4th edition of BTF guidelines. And later they say that, later they have come up with level 2A evidence that a large fronto-temporoparietal decompressive craniectomy, as opposed to a smaller one, to a target reduce mortality and better neurological outcome. There are certain other untouched topics which I will not be able to cover, but one should always be consciously keeping a watch on them, such as electrolyte imbalance, sodium and potassium imbalance, fall in magnesium, physiotherapy, hygienic care, and associated injuries, especially cervical spine injury, then neurohabilitation and outcome measures, particularly with Glasgow outcome score or extended Glasgow outcome score. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Renu, for such an excellent talk. We are really happy to, have heard in details about the traumatic brain injury management. And I'm happy today that more number of our residents have joined this webinar. And I'm sure we are all benefited by this, and for them it will be very useful. Now I hand over to Dr. C.V. Singh, sir, to take any question and answers for this presentation, 2 presentations today. Dr. C.V. Singh, sir.
Thank you, madam. Both the topics were very good and very interesting. First, I'd like to ask from Prashant, Professor Prashant, that which neonatal ventilator is the ideal and we are using in the Rohtak Medical College.
Thank you very much, sir, for taking up this practical issue. Sir, the best ventilator to use for pediatric and infant management inside theater is the one which you have and you are comfortable with. So we need to know what ventilatory machines or anesthesia workstations we have. Presently, we have Draeger Primus with us, which is inbuilt ventilator, which can ventilate the neonates and infants very well. And we have other types of workstations also. All are compatible with neonatal ventilation.
Second question, of course it is all practical. You told that neonate, we will use the armor tube.
Yes, sir.
Or pediatric. Armor tube is, this size is available in neonate type?
Sir, 3.5 is available, 3.5 and 4 is available. So if the neonate is 3+ kgs, you can use it. That is because of, that was to be highlighted because the patient is going to be in prone position, and then there is a very common practical problem of having kinking of the tubes once you place the patient in prone position.
And easily pass through, or some stability is for that?
So Stellate is definitely required, and Stellate is most of the time required for neonates. It's easier to have Stellate with us.
For the neonatal tube?
Yes.
For 3.5?
Yes.
A flexible Stellate?
So Stellate has to be rigid, sir.
Rigid? Okay. From Professor, okay, thank you very much. For the Professor Renuwala, we will. Yes. I like to ask. The first question is how much is the use of encephalography in neurosurgical case?
Sorry, sir.
Encephalography during neurosurgical cases. Operative.
Operative, sir, no, we are not doing it.
Not doing.
Sir, you are asking about monitoring of these patients while doing
Yes,
surgery?
yes.
No, sir. No, sir.
Not using.
No, sir.
But it is useful or not?
Yes, sir. It is
Okay.
definitely useful and as philography.
But it is not using it in our institution.
No, sir. Epilepsy surgery there we are using, but not in the other surgeries. Epilepsy surgery is not conducted in our institution, sir.
Okay. Second is there any method of measuring the depth of anesthesia? These days, special machines are coming for measuring the depth of anesthesia.
Yes, sir. There are several new PSI type monitors which are coming, but entropy and BIS, these are the most standard care which most of the institutions are carrying. And there are various monitors which also measure surgical plethysmographic index to know the pain of the patient. They deduct the depth of the anesthesia and from the pain. So they can say they can tell both depth as well as about the pain.
Regarding the anesthetic agent we are using in neurosurgery, there is a special in encephalography, the special curves are there. So these will be useful coming in that encephalography, like halothane or isoflurane.
Yes, sir, definitely. Halothane we have stopped using, sir, now. We are using isoflurane, sevoflurane or desflurane. Desflurane is also quite good in neurosurgical procedures, sir.
Okay, well, because recently I heard there is a special advantage of measuring the depth of anesthesia and as well as the uses of encephalography during various type of anesthetic agent. Okay,
Yes, sir.
thank you, madam.
Dr. Prashant, just for the benefit of students, just I would like to ask you that you showed a photograph with a very large head for hydrocephalus. So how did you manage the airway in that patient?
Madam, as the next picture was attached to it, the main importance to position and prepare is that we need to have the body kept on a pillow so that the large head is taken care and it can be aligned to the body. And the best is to have the nose chin axis if they come aligned and the head goes down to the body. So putting a pillow is very helpful, and then inhalational induction with direct laryngoscopy that helps, and that was the method I used for that particular patient.
Just a comment that what we can do is we can also, if nothing helps, sometimes when you take the big head into your lap, that also helps in alignment of the axis.
Definitely, yes, ma'am. Definitely, yes. Those pictures were of the same patient, and the pillow helped us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Dr. Renu, just I have a comment that because the gut motility is a problem in a head injury patient, and if nothing is helping, as erythromycin is a good choice. I have used in many cases that 250 milligram TDS or QID.
Yes, ma'am. There were few studies going on which they have used erythromycin.
It can be a choice.
Yes, ma'am.
So do you have any questions from postgraduate students?
There was a question in the chat box, madam.
Sorry?
There is a question in chat box from Shakil. What should be CO2 in traumatic brain injury? Is it 30 to 35 or 35 to 40?
Shakil, it is better if you mentioned whether you are asking about EtCO2 or PaCO2.
Mentioning EtCO2.
Achha, EtCO2. EtCO2 30 to 35.
I think, Dr. Renu, you told CO2 should be 30 to 35.
What should be CO2? He has not mentioned EtCO2 or PaCO2.
PaCO2 should be between 35 to 40.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
He is asking about PtCO2.
No, he has just mentioned CO2.
Now he has clarified, he is asking PaO2. So Renu is right, he has answered both the questions.
Yeah.
If it is EtCO2, what has to be there, and what is if it is PaCO2, what has to be there. Dr. Batra, any comments from your side?
Is not there.
I then thank all the respected chairpersons and speakers for their kind contribution. Ma'am and sir. I also invite Dr. Sangeeta Khanna, past president, Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, to kindly webinar. Sangeeta ma'am, kindly unmute.
Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Preeti. I didn't get it. I think your voice is breaking.
Ma'am, I kindly request you to invite all the delegates for the next webinar.
Okay. Yeah.
Just-
Thank you, Dr.
just let-
Preeti. So I think Dr. Sethi will be making the announcement for the next webinar, which we are organizing which is being organized by the Gurgaon branch. And Dr. Vivek Saluja, President ISA Gurgaon, I think he's also there with us. So I think he can raise the invite if he is around, and Dr. Sethi can give the announcement, because I think it's a tie-up with the Edwards and they are trying to organize a webinar for us. Dr. Sethi and Dr. Saluja, please.
Yes, thank you very much, madam. We will be meeting on Friday instead of Sunday this time, and it will be from 4:30 onwards. It is a talk on advanced hemodynamic monitoring and the other topics. Then I will be sharing the details tomorrow and the timings accordingly. Tomorrow I will tell you the details.
Yes.
But it is
Dr.
on
Saluja
18th Friday at 4:30 p.m.
Yeah, and Dr. Saluja, he can invite everybody. Dr. Saluja, President ISA Gurgaon, is there with us. Dr. Saluja, please.
I take this opportunity to invite everybody, whoever is tuned in, both from Haryana and from all over India, if anybody is there. We would love to have all of you with us. And I'm sure we look forward to the academic feast on the 18th. Thank you so much, Dr. Sangeeta.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, sir. Finally, I kindly invite Dr. Praveen Goel, Secretary ISA, Rohtak City Branch, to give a vote of thanks. Dr. Praveen Goel, I request you, sir, to kindly extend a vote of thanks to everyone.
I think
Praveen was here only.
Yeah, he's here, sir.
Just
Dr. Praveen Goel.
because he was telling that it's some cesarean.
Dr. Preeti, I would like to say a few things here.
Yes,
Can I?
ma'am.
Till the time Dr. Praveen Goel is joining,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to thank from the Department of Anesthesia to all the ISA dignitaries whom names I couldn't mention in the introduction. I would like to say Dr. Murlidhar, Dr. Venkat Giri, Dr. Suresh Bhargav, Dr. Virender, Dr. Sangeeta Khanna from Gurgaon, our esteemed chairperson, Dr. Siti Singh, Dr. Shashi, Dr. Sushila, Dr. Ajay Batra, and learned speakers Prashant and Dr. Renu, and all were very fine in this talk. And I would like to thank all from my side, but now customary ISA City Branch, Dr. Yeah, I mean, you request him to say a customary thanks to all of you. Preeti, you can invite now him. Can you hear me?
Yes, madam, we can hear you.
Yes,
Parveen is there
madam.
only.
We can hear
Parveen
you.
is there.
Parveen is
Parveen
here.
is logged in. Parveen, you can go ahead. Yes, please go ahead.
We are not able to hear him. Dr. Praveen, we are not able to hear you.
Hello.
Yes, Praveen, go ahead.
Good evening to all of you. I feel privileged to be part of today's academic program. Ladies and gentlemen, no event can happen overnight. It requires a lot of combined efforts from many people at different levels to make it successful. I, on behalf of ISA branch, Rohtak City branch, and Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, take this opportunity to thank our chief guest for today, Dr. Muralidhar Joshi, President, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, National. Guest of honor, Dr. Suresh Kumar Bhargav, Vice President, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, National. Guest of honor, Dr. AM President-elect, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, National.
Thank you.
Our own Dr. Naveen Malhotra, Honorary Secretary, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists. Guest of honor, Dr. Virendra Sharma, Treasurer, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists. Guest of honor, Dr. S.S. Baswa, GC member, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, National. Guest of honor, Dr. Rajiv Gupta, GC member, Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, National. I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for gracing this academic feast and sparing your valuable time. I am equally thankful to Dr. Savita Shani, ma'am, Senior Professor and HOD Anesthesiology at PGIMS Rohtak and President of ISA branch, City branch, Dr. Sunil Sethi, President Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, Dr. Yashveer Arya, Secretary Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, for providing immense support and continuous guidance to all of us. I express my sincere thanks to all our respective chairpersons for the scientific session. Dr. C.V. Singh, the past President of Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, Dr. Shashi Kiran, Senior Professor, Anesthesiology, PGIMS Rohtak, Dr. Sushila Takshak, Senior Professor, Anesthesiology, PGIMS Rohtak, Dr. Ajay Batra, past President of Society of Anesthesiologists, Haryana, and our brilliant speakers, Dr. Prashant Kumar, Professor Anesthesiology, PGIMS Rohtak, Dr. Renu Bala, Professor Anesthesiology, PGIMS Rohtak. Hearty thanks to all of them. Our master of today's ceremony, Dr. Preeti Gehlot, Associate Professor Anesthesiology at PGIMS Rohtak. Last but not the least, I want to thank all the delegates and students who joined us this evening. I am really grateful to one and all for sparing your most valuable time and being with us to make this webinar a truly successful one. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen, for your good words. And I'm really happy that our Vice President, Dr. Suresh Bhargav, sat through whole of the webinar with video on, and Dr. Venkat Giri also was listening. Thank you very much. And we shall meet next Friday, 18th December, 4:30 p.m. Thank you very much. Long live ISA. Jai Hind. Good evening to all.
Okay, thank you. Really, thank you.